All right, welcome. Live podcast number 6, Engine House Training. Kind of a unique podcast this week, kind of based off demand and requests from some of the viewers off of one of our lead instructors, Kyle Sanders, Active Killer, Bridging the Gap class. So looking forward to a good conversation with some subject matter experts in what has become, unfortunately, a necessary field that we got to be trained and prepared in, that we hopefully never need the skill set. I do want to start off, though, with a little bit of housekeeping. All the live podcasts are starting to get up on the podcast page. Thanks, Gary, for taking care of that. Live podcast 1 and 2 should be up. If you're having trouble getting them, though, you may need to unsubscribe to the podcast link and then resubscribe to Engine House Training Podcast. And then all the new ones will be in there, and we are going to move over all the old ones to our new system. So check that out if you missed some of the earlier weeks of our Quarantine Live podcast. Last week, while we were actually recording our show, there was a line of duty death in the west side of the state. And I wanted to start off with having a moment of silence for that fallen member. All right, Kyle, tell us a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. We'll let you go around the room and make your quick introductions, and then we'll get rolling.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Like I said, this was one of these things that Gary and I know you've and other people have brought up and talking about, and it's something that is still actually fairly new to a lot of the fire districts and fire service around us. The more places we go and talk to, a lot of people, it's one of those that gets discussed and kind of put in the back pocket of that's never going to happen here, so it's better to ignore it, and we're just not going to discuss it because a lot of political reasons too that people just try to ignore this. I have asked several people to come on that are kind of subject area experts that I work with a lot of the training and a lot of the stuff that we've done with this. I'll name some of the faces off that I'm trying to look at everybody that's on here now. Who I can see now, we have Lieutenant Dave Cruz from Metro West. He's one of the TAC medics with us. Jamie Young, he's battalion chief. He also works at St. Charles City, but he's an instructor with Engine House Training that's done a lot of stuff. We have Lieutenant Tom Batterop from Metro West, Jason Marin from Metro West, Captain Matt Seger from Metro West. A lot of these guys are all TAC medics. Also Chief Tiemann, and also I see Chief Flouder, I think, was on here too. Both of those guys have done a lot of work with setting up our tabletops and doing a lot of the ICS training with our chiefs and everything like that. So they kind of have some more stuff to bring to the table that a little bit more than I work with some of the ICS structure and a lot of stuff. So that's a couple quick names. I think we have a couple of the officers from St. Louis County Police that are trying to log on, and due to the problem with the link, we're still trying to get some people on here, so hopefully they can jump on. But kind of start out, like I said, and I'll let a lot of these guys jump in as we go and as we talk about this. But the class that you kind of mentioned it, that we do with Engine House, so we started trying to get out there. We started some of our MACTAC training with St. Louis County Police probably, I don't know, I think Dave's on here. Dave and Matt and Tommy, you guys started this probably 8 years ago, you think?
Somewhere in that ballpark. It's been 6-8 years for sure, with every year being a step forward from the year past. We're trying to build on it each year, and up to the point where we are now, where we're doing active drills. Obviously this spring was delayed because of COVID, but it was set up to be this spring. Would have been the 7th or 8th year, I believe.
Yeah.
Hey, Kyle, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but what's MACTEC? I mean, there might be people that aren't from our area listening, so that's part of the reason I wanted this show, because you got to challenge yourself, and I know nothing about this, so start simple. What's MACTEC?
Yeah, no, you're good. Shit, I'm trying to remember now right off the top of my head. It's multi-agent. You asked me trick questions already, Jeff.
Multi-agency counterterrorism
Terrorism.
action capability.
Yeah.
Hey, if I'm wondering, if someone out there is wondering, I don't mind being the dumb guy to ask the dumb questions. And also, I saw Kev Montero he's got on here as well.
He finally got on. So what Dave said, that's MacTac. It's a lot of stuff. We usually just call it MacTac. There's another one. I think, Jamie, you said you guys did the RacTac version a lot out in St. Charles.
That's correct.
Yeah. So a lot of these, from talking to Jamie, there's a lot of different acronyms and all this stuff that are out there that people develop stuff, and they're kind of all across the board. And some places use certain ones. And a lot of these, when like I sat down and talked to Jamie about, like, we do this one and they do the other one, at the end of the day, they're all pretty similar and the same, I would say. But the biggest thing that I found and that we've started working on, and why I call this bridging the gap, is what this comes down to. Like, when we started training, is really trying to figure out what the officers do and what they're going to turn around and expect of us versus what we're going to turn around and expect them to do. That was some of the biggest stuff. And that comes down to ICS. The most of your police officers that are going to be showing up for this really don't do ICS. And it breaks all the way down to just using a walkie-talkie, using their radio, and some of that stuff that we found. So just kind of going through a lot of the stuff on the training level of really trying to figure out the differences of what they do versus what we do, and what we're going to expect to show up, and what they think we're bringing to the table, and stuff like that. So we can get this, everybody working together, very uniform to get in there. We all have the same job to get done, but it's two completely different ball teams on how we're going about this and what we're doing. So that's been some of the biggest stuff that we've been trying to overcome. If anybody's got stuff to add to that.
Well, I guess if no, somebody was saying something. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Mark Slaughter. Just to re-emphasize Kyle's point regarding ICS, that's the most important thing, is getting the guys that don't do it every day to grasp the concept, so that when it comes to working the incident, they're not trying to handle everything by themselves, and that they're delegating so that they can maintain a reasonable span of control, and they're able to work the incident more effectively.
I
Awesome.
think a big thing that is, go ahead, I'm sorry, whoever was talking.
No, I was just segueing. Go ahead.
I think a big thing that has helped with that portion of this is, we've been doing this active shooter MacTac training, like I said, 6-8 years. And then about a year ago, starting with that ICS training over there with Chief Tiemann and everybody, and Chief Slaughter. And that has been a big help on the ICS side. And I think Kyle and all the guys would agree. And the police officers, this is not knocking anybody, they'll freely agree that that's just not something that they do very often, that they don't live in that world, and a lot of that to them is brand new. And so I think as a whole, that has been a big help to when and if this incident happens, that we're going to get this thing at least started off on the right foot.
Yeah, and that's, like I said, we really, it was a huge eye opener to me when we first started this a few years ago, and I tried to bring some of the cops on here. I'm not sure if any of our TAC guys have made it on yet or not. So they can almost defend themselves, because you got a bunch of firemen on here talking about the police side of things. But it truly is a huge eye opener, and a lot of it was opened up to me whenever we started getting involved in doing this training all the way around, where some of the officers, like I said, goes down to not using their radios, and the way they use theirs is completely different the way we use ours on the fire side, to where the fire side, we train and really hit home on, hey, if I need to be able to use my radio behind my back and with my eyes shut to get to different channels, or I need to do all this and switch. In the old days, it used to be to go to command A was all the way 16 to the right, and now we have our different banks and TAC channels and all that. But a lot of these officers, that's something they don't even think about. They don't even do that. So that was one of the biggest eye openers of, And we discussed this in the tabletop ICS training too, of, okay, how are we going to do, and this originally sets off who's going to be talking to who. You know, we got fire trucks coming up and staging, trying to figure out what's going on. You got officers running into the building. And then that kind of goes into us trying to figure out who's where and accountability of everybody. And so just sitting down over the last several years and talking to the officers and talking to chiefs and people trying to figure out the best way to figure out communications and accountability for everybody. And then that's just almost the tip of the iceberg before we start breaking down into, okay, what's the fire department going to carry? How are we getting guys in there with rescue task force and all this other stuff that kind of goes on with all that. So there's a lot that goes into this, and hopefully we can get a good conversation going here with all these other guys that are on here and kind of what they can bring to the table and their thoughts and ideas from talks that we've had with everybody.
So you're talking about how important communications are. So let's jump into it. It seems like a pretty good spot to start. Obviously, we have people from St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and St. Charles County, so pretty good region, St. Louis region, so to speak. I know where I work, we can switch to the police zones. I don't know if they can switch to our zones. Maybe Mario can answer that. But what's kind of the consensus of how we're going to do that, how we're going to handle that? Are just the company officers, just the chiefs switching? What'd you guys come up with in your drills and practice?
One of the current things we come up with, Jeff, is liaison each ICS position. So each position in the RTFs and your staging level managers and any position has an officer with it. So that way we're not trying to talk on their channels as much. They make decisions together because we don't understand the vernacular, the vocabulary that they use, and they don't understand what we use. Whereas they're rattling off a 22-0 something, we're thinking of Monarch Fire District when we hear that. And in this once in a lifetime call, trying to understand the way they're doing things can make things really difficult. So the biggest thing we've done so far is just to marry those positions throughout the event, which helps it flow more smoothly.
Gotcha. So every group, and forgive me for not using terms, every group of firefighters is going to have police officers with them. And what's worked best in these drills and trainings is to keep the firefighters on their network and the police on their network, and kind of go with it that way. And obviously, in any type of active shooting, active killer type situation, I would assume the guys with the guns, the cops, are going to be in charge of our movements and where we go. So that makes a lot of sense. Anyone got any?
Hey, Jeff, I think that you just said something that's very important, and I'm not understand like 100% do I know what everybody's level of training here is with it. But I mean, we can ICS and we can do everything that we want to death, but the major factor that we need to take into account is that this is a police operation. And while we have some semblance of control there, ultimately this is a police matter, and we're there is in support, at least in most jurisdictions in the area. And so that's very important for people to understand exactly just where we sit in a lot of the hierarchy in these things.
Jamie, let me ask you, I know we've talked a little bit over the phone in the past year or two about the differences between RACTAC and MACTAC and some of the stuff. The way we've been working it is, and it's kind of goes right into what you were saying, when this incident starts, it's absolutely 100% a police incident. Obviously, we have an active shooter or something going on. And then, hey, Agnes, sorry, dog's whining. But the way we've been running it is you have the police, we've got a unified command, obviously, but we've got police running it. They're in charge until the killing stops, and they've created that CCP. And then at that point, it kind of switches over to where we're the fire and EMS, because obviously now we've stopped the killings, done. Now it's stopped the dying, as they say. And so at that point, typically we're turning it over, and now it's going to be a fire EMS matter, and it kind of switches back and forth at that stage. Is that how you guys are looking at it as well?
I think in a best case scenario, Matt, that's how it would be. I think there's a bunch of little bitty truths that people need to understand when you kind of enter into this stuff. And the lot of the misconceptions that people has is that this is a SWAT operation, and this is not a SWAT operation. At least
Correct.
not for at least another hour and a half until this
Correct.
thing is going on. And so what this is this is the basic foot cops running this thing. And this is, even if you can get a sergeant there, you're really lucky if you can get, in the first, within the first few minutes setting some of these things up. And so, this is, when you look at a police thing, that's kind of where I'm getting at, is that this is a police operation until we get a lot of stuff set up, until that active killing, like what you talked about, is over, and then we can step in. But we've even seen in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, or whatever it was, down in Florida, how many times, their firefighters were trained in this. And the police just time and time again refused to insert them into this problem. And, so best case scenario, absolutely, it's a dual type thing. But we also got to understand where we sit in that hierarchy, because the last thing that we need to be doing is, I don't know, creating a bigger incident by getting in front, get into a what swinging match, right?
Right. No, I couldn't agree more.
Our past couple of years of these drills has definitely decreased the chance of that happening. I think it's developed, especially since the tabletops have been started. It's developed that mutual respect, and law enforcement can kind of learn from how we do ICS. And there's a lot of questions asked by upper level management of law enforcement to see how we do things. And that's the other hard part, is from the fire service, you're trained in ICS from day one, and the details, and an ambulance crew can run a situation until more chiefs get there if they're all somewhere else. Law enforcement operates in that single individual entity a lot of times. They don't have that. So, but as they come to training, they see that and they learn that. And we're still trying to figure out, from a law enforcement perspective in St. Louis County, what the first the first officer who's going to take the ICS level is. They don't have it. There's no designee that says, hey, the first in supervisor or the first in mutual aid supervisor. We're still working on that. Still kind of trial and error, and we haven't come up with that magic number yet.
Where's Corey when we need him to talk about that?
I know.
Yeah.
Argue with me.
But no, like adding on what Dave said.
Whoever was logged in as 4488 had their hand raised for something.
No.
Go ahead. Floor's yours.
Maybe.
I will say this. I'd like to hear, for my selfish reasons, I'd like to hear from Mario at some point to see where we stand in all this. For you guys that are all trained in this, when you use your acronyms and stuff, though, assume that none of us don't know any of this, because I don't. And so if you could explain some of that, I think it would be very beneficial for people that have no training in it, and our target audience, for other people coming in trying to get information on where to get going, if that makes sense. So Mario, if you can unmute yourself and maybe give a quick synopsis of your experience in our training.
Hello?
There you are.
Am I here? Can you hear me?
We hear you.
All right. Well, I can tell you this. In St. Louis City, and we've run into issues with, really more so on the police department side, with upper brass, because as you guys were alluding to, it is a police incident, and they make it very known that it's a police incident. So we've done training scenarios, and part of it is that first arriving street officer. A lot of the street officers, they aren't trained, or they don't have the knowledge of what our capabilities are and what our role is in an active shooter incident. So what we found is, a lot of times it happens that police officers, they kind of want to do their job and do our job at the same time. So what they do is they go in, and typically what happens is the first person they encounter that's injured, they start removing those individuals. And it's a hard sell to try to explain to them. That's not your job. Your job is to protect that area so we can get our crews in those areas to get those people basically medical attention. Because it's one of those things that, like, we don't carry guns, you guys have the guns. But a lot of times what ends up happening is they go in and basically fire EMS sits high and dry, it's staging, and they don't do anything until the individuals are brought out to them.
Mario,
And
I know we spoke about this a while back. Have you guys had the opportunity to do any of these active shooter trainings in the city? I know you guys were hoping to have a couple of these incidents. How many have you had? We've
had a couple, and this is just my opinion. On the fire EMS side, it goes great. But it gets into, like I said, police upper brass. They make it well known. Hey, this is a police incident. This isn't a fire EMS incident. And we run into problems where we try to explain to them, hey, this is how we feel these operations should be running with these rescue task force setups. But I think a lot of it is just they're not that knowledgeable on it. And I think they are, I don't know if they're afraid, but they don't want to, I don't know if they just don't want to grasp that concept that a rescue task force model is a good thing. And I'm not bashing the police by any means, but I know in conversation with our upper brass, it just seems like a lot of times it's because the police want to be in the forefront on the news about these type of incidents, and it becomes an ego thing more than anything else, in my opinion.
One of the ways that we kind of overcame that initially, not this year, but the year, but yet last year, was we came up with 3 between us that were designing the exercise from law enforcement and fire and EMS. We came up with 3 methods of which are the kind of top priorities or the top objectives. Neutralize a shooter was 1, save lives and treat the injured victims is 2, and then gain situational awareness related to the gaps was the 3rd. And if we could address those 3 things, we knew that we were on the right track as a collective team from fire, law enforcement, and EMS. When we talked about that, we said, of those 3 things, what is it, how are we judged by this? And we all came up with, obviously, it's the amount of lives lost in this at the end of the day. And once we kind of got to that point, we understood that obviously you got to neutralize the shooter. We can't go in and save lives until that's been accomplished. How do we support while they're running those beat cops in? How do we support them from an ICS structural standpoint? How do we set that up for them? How do we help them with that, with maybe that one sergeant that's outside until they get their command structure or their command officers there? How can we help them, and how can we become part of the solution? Once that team kind of developed, it wasn't a law enforcement team. It was a unified command team. And it really did actually come together in most incidents, not all the time. You've obviously got personalities that sometimes, as Mario said, that doesn't always work. But most of the time, we delivered it 22 times this year, and the same amount last year. It came together because we kind of started off with, there's too much to do, not enough people to do it. How do we start, and what are the primary focus points for us?
Let me ask you guys this: when you guys in your training or your evolutions that you guys done, you guys don't make entry until the shooter is neutralized?
He's either neutralized. Well, neutralized either as in he's been shot or he's been contained.
Right.
So we know that there's a area that we can get to. And to Jeff's point earlier, I said CCP, and I should have explained what that is.
Right.
So for those out there that are not aware of this stuff, so a CCP is a casualty collection point, and that is where the police have found an area that they have a lot of victims close by. They can get those victims to them. They can protect that area, and there's access for us to get egressed out of the building with those victims. And so until until they know they've neutralized the shooter or they have them in wing C and we've got victims in wing A, just for as an example, we're not going to go in. So we're waiting for them on the radio to say, we've got a CCP located in an X location. And we know when they say that they have in some way, shape, or form, whether it's shot or just contained the threat.
Okay.
All based off the theory of one shooter, which is, 98, 99% of the time.
Right.
Dave, is that?
And
That's accurate.
Okay.
And I like to, Brian Athens been several good posts over there. I think we answered some of the stuff with the ICS stuff, but he said it's hot, warm. They set up hot, warm, and cold zones, which to me makes sense for us because we all should have a hazmat background. And I guess his point is the rescue task forces will go up into the warm zone as long as they have 2 cops as protection, and I guess everyone else can be in the cold zone. So that kind of makes sense to put it in terms that the majority of firefighters should already know if you have any type of hazmat background. So good stuff. Thank you. Thanks for posting that, Brian. Keep it up.
Chief Team had put up some definitions for anybody that's curious as well to kind of help as we talk throughout this in case we forget to mention them when we name
Yeah,
it.
I just saw that pop up. So make sure you guys got your chat box open. If you don't, one thing we glazed over in Kyle, are any of the cops on yet?
No, the one, a couple of them are having issues logging on, so they all bailed. So I told we'd make fun of them, and I just texted them what we were saying bad about them behind his back.
I was going to say they are cops. We can't expect them to do anything too crazy.
Yeah. I will ask real quick, Jeff, just because she was kind of texting me, and as we started with this, we kind of started with communications and stuff. The one person, Erica, that works at SSM, so we just had one of these in Maryland Heights, I'd say a couple months ago, maybe longer than that because my time frame sucks while I'm on quarantine. And they debriefed this, and she said their biggest stuff was some stuff. So I'll let her talk about it if she's unmuted that 44888 number real quick. I see if it's anything interesting. If she's willing to talk.
She should be on. It's unmuted.
We'll give her a chance to talk.
She's like
Erica.
you guys back to the bar.
Erica. All right.
I guess it's not working.
Well, I was going to say it's unmuted on her, and her phone might be muted.
Yeah.
We'll give her one more second, and then I got a question.
Yeah. I'm getting text messages that says I'm talking and my phone's unmuted, so I guess it's.
Tell her to leave Boot or Gary and tell her to call back in, and we'll try and get back to her. I did want you guys to answer because Brian also put up in the chat. They've had a hard time getting, I guess, just the regular street cops to get anyone from PD to say they're in charge. Have you guys all had that same problem? And if so, what are we doing? What are you doing on the fire service side to rectify that?
That's what I was referencing earlier, and we're still working on that. The importance, I think, there's some other models around the country. Myself and Lieutenant Vatterott have done some teaching where they call it the fifth supervisor, basically, or first supervisor. The guy comes in, takes over. But we've had the discussion. We've talked about having the first mutual aid because when they get there, and it's gotten a little bit in recent years after Parkland, there's not an officer out there that wants to be outside because they don't be the one that gets caught not going in. So that caused some issues. But now with the implementation of our tabletops, we stress the importance of how this is not going to work and how we can't stop the dying until we have that communication built up with fire and EMS and police working together. So we don't have a dead set person yet. PD's working on that from St. Louis County, but it's still kind of a work in progress. We're just kind of relying on somebody to step up and do so, or that first in company officer communicate with our dispatch who contacts their dispatch and says, hey, Go meet that big fire truck at the corner of here and here and talk to that guy.
Yeah, and I think we got to cut them a little slack because we're all used to going everywhere in groups, and the majority of the cops in this country are by themselves. And there's no doubt, when I get on a fire truck, who's in charge of that fire truck and who's in charge of that battalion, and they might be, just knowing a few friends that are cops or whatever. I mean, they may be 10 minutes away from their sergeant, where most of the time we're 2 arm lengths away from our company officer, so.
Well, something else, Jeff,
Jim.
that for the most part, I mean, outside of probably St. Louis City and probably St. Louis County PD, there's not a municipal police department that can run one of these things all by itself. And so, if this were to happen in, say, Creve Coeur or Chesterfield, you're going to have officers coming from all over the place. If this was to happen in St. Charles City, we would have St. Peter's Police, we'd have St. Charles Police, we'd have St. Charles County. Chances are we'd have people coming from across the river. And so that just only convolutes that whole command thing even more as it goes on. I know that when we did our training here at St. Charles City a few years ago, we specifically focused, the training session was held in for our guys, but we specifically focused our attention on to those sergeants and lieutenants that, the people that would hopefully be taking charge, and trying to get them to take a hold of this situation and start to do it. And I think what Dave talked about is that first in company officer, that second in company officer, getting to that officer that's in charge as fast as possible and come alongside them and, guide them through, what we can do and what our options are.
Jamie, it's ironic you say that I couldn't agree more. And St. Louis County is a perfect example of that. Like you said, there being so many different, not just 43 fire departments or fire districts, but there are, how many different municipalities with PD. That's exactly one of the issues we've run into when we've talked to St. Louis County and said, we all have SOPs and POMs that tell us, okay, if you're the second in on a house fire, this is what you're going to do. If you're third in, you're doing truck work. Everybody knows these things. But with the police, it's just so different, and they are not set up like that. And we've tried, and Tommy and Kyle and Dave know I've got myself some dirty looks a couple times because I've tried to push that point that we need to have a person identified who's going on the police side, who's going to stop and set up command, because until that happens, it's just going to be chaos. And the problem is that like Dave said, nobody wants to stop. So if you have the first 50 officers, whether they're street cops or sergeants or whatever, if they all flood the scene, we've almost told them you're gonna damn near have to step in front of a car or tackle somebody to just say, hey, tag, you're it. At least for now, until I can get somebody else, you have to be with me so we can set up command, just so we can know what they're doing and they can know what we're doing. Because until that first thing happens, I mean, you're just kind of dead in the water. So we really tried to push, hey, let's talk about the second sergeant or whatever that person would be. But with there being all those departments, it's hard to say who that, what I'm saying, that makes it challenging for sure.
Absolutely.
And to add,
Vanderont had something also. Go ahead, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're up.
Am I on? Yeah. What Matt was saying and what Dave was saying, although it is a police situation as it starts out, of course, when that first truck, if I arrive in that first truck in, like they said, we are, at staging, and that's going to be the first place we're going to marry up with the police officer, which will be pretty quick. Then actually they're looking for us to kind of run all that stuff outside and to get all those teams ready and everything. So, I mean, we got a big job to do out there while they're, going in with their, until they set up a CCP and all that. So, again, that's the first place we're going to marry up with a police officer, and that way we can get things going. But they're looking for us for all that, and what the things we've done so far. And they're very receptive, and they want us to do that. Makes sense?
No, it makes perfect sense for me. I mean, the whole thing, when you guys are talking, and I guess I never really put it together, we're kind of blessed regionally. The way we train, I mean, we can essentially, a lot of you guys could end up in the city on a fire or move ups or vice versa. And, you know, which of us work at different departments and we kind of operate seamlessly. I assume that the police are not training quite like that at that level, the way we kind of have regionally. And I know you can go other places in the country and maybe even the state, and their fire departments aren't as good as we are in the St. Louis region. But that sounds like, from the police perspective, something they need to work on fixing. Sounds like you guys are helping them steer the course, though.
And, you know, Jeff, I've seen, you know, kind of going outside of the St. Louis area, there's also a lot of disconnects too. And that kind of goes back to the whole, you know, starting this with some of the tabletops and just working and training with the cops. They don't really understand half the stuff we bring to the table. Cause like, I think Jamie or somebody mentioned early on in this isn't the TAC guys that we work with that are going to be doing this. This is your everyday beat officer that's driving down the street when this comes out, that just got done giving somebody a ticket. Now he's thrown into this situation that he's trying to rely on this training that they do probably once a year. Whenever you get out with a lot of the cops from our area and you start getting these officers, this is one of these things. They're like, okay, yeah, I guess we're going to go through the motions and go do this training again, kind of what I've seen. So it's not your TAC guys. It's not your guys that are up on this and this is in their wheelhouse that I'm going to go in and do this. This is your everyday beat officer. So I put it to firemen all the time. Like, we all have those firefighters that we work with that are riding the recliner that's like, oh, shoot, I hope I don't catch fire today because I'm with this guy and I know what he's bringing to the table. So that's kind of how I put it to the firefighters. Like, this is how you need to look at your cops that you're originally going to show up with and that you're going to be dealing with. Is these are your everyday beat cops. Not every beat cops like that. Most of them could be on their game, but it's not going to be your star players that are showing up to this thing most of the time. And then it kind of goes into where some of the other smaller rural places that we've gone to and talked, there's a huge disconnect between those. There's other districts like within half hour outside of St. Louis City that they don't talk to their cops and cops don't talk to them. And we've brought this subject up, and there's one place that I've been talking to that's not too far from where I live that he's trying to break that and get this going. And their sheriff's department's like, nope, absolutely not. I'm not training with the fire department. It's not going to happen. So when you start getting into some of the more rural areas, and that's just kind of their thought process of the cops are going to do their thing, the fires are going to do their thing, and it's just a total disconnect until you can really hit home on like, hey, this is what we're going to bring to the table. And that's kind of what we've seen a lot. It was like that in St. Louis County when we first started this with some of our training and talking about, hey, we have to get ICS set up because this is what we are going to do. And the cops are looking at us like, no, that's not going to happen. We're not bringing you guys in to do this. To where now it's starting to turn a little bit, but then the tabletops, it still shows when we bring all of our officers and chief officers to it. And you sit down and talk to some of these guys and you explain to them like, oh, fire department shows up, I can give you pre-plans of the building and you can see where every exit, stairwell, and everything there is you need to know about this place. And half the cops are turning around looking at you like, what's a pre-plan? So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just getting out and talking to those guys and getting that pre-plan going to where they can understand, hey, this is what we're going to bring to the table and this is what we can offer you guys. And that's what I've seen. A lot of it opens the police officers' eyes once they start realizing what we can bring and offer them to manage one of these scenarios.
I think you said it, Kyle. It's just that we're a tool that they really don't understand how to use.
Yeah, no, and there's been a lot that, like I said, the tabletop scenarios that we did, and for us, I can explain kind of the difference between our training for some of them that don't, that are newer to this, and I apologize for not doing that before. So we do our MACTAC training that we talked about, where we're doing our hands-on. That's the firefighters, paramedics, and the beat cops are going out, and we're doing hands-on training where we're working together, going in and forming our rescue task force teams and actually working on getting people out. And the police are the same way. So the more we do with Engine House, we travel, what's the biggest complaint that firefighters have? Hey, this was a great class, but the people I wish were here are chiefs. they're not here. So how are we going to push this? So we kind of taken that and we switched it over and we do tabletop training. That's a little bit more friendlier. So we can invite chief officers and from both sides in, and we all play together. And that's the best way to describe our tabletop scenarios, is to make it to where we can get chief officers involved. And that was one of the biggest things when I've sat down with some of these captains and lieutenants from the police side and explained to them, like, in the fire, they ask, well, I need this information. It's like, well, the fire department has that. Well, how do you guys have that? Oh, we go out and do pre-plans of buildings. And like a lot of that stuff, they don't know how we operate. They don't know what we do. They don't know what we can offer, what we can bring to the table or anything. And half of them didn't even know that we've already been training in the rescue task force. So when we show up, and for us, if you show up trying to get this unified command set up, depending on where your officer is coming from, they might not understand when you show up in a Tahoe I make fun of some of our chief officers, Jamie, and you got your Tahoe and you show up and say, hey, I'm in charge here. And they're trying to figure out why you're bothering them or what's going on with that. Some of the biggest stuff is to get that ICS and that unified command set up, and then just us throwing out like, hey, I got this information. I can give you this. I can give you this. I can set up radio channels and all the stuff we do every day that we take for granted. A lot of these guys don't understand that. And that's all the way up. I mean, that's not from your B cops.
Dave at once.
So.
What's up?
Kyle's exactly right. This is Mark Flotter again. Kyle's exactly right. Because I'm heavily involved with the tabletops, and getting the officers both on the fire department and the police department to understand what each other's doing and the capabilities of each other is really important. It also gives you a chance to meet somebody face to face. So the first time you're meeting them is at a tabletop and not in an actual incident. And that's one of the most important things that we discuss with everyone. This year, we had the luxury of introducing some school district administrators and officials into the training as well. So it gave us a chance to meet the school district officials. So when this incident does happen at a school, we're not meeting their principal, their superintendent for the first time. We've already seen them. We know who they are, so they understand what we're doing, and we understand what they need to do. And that's just the most important thing with the tabletop is getting that facial recognition and understanding of capabilities.
Another thing we did is when we do our MacTech, actually hands-on training, the past couple of years, we've designed it to try and have regions come to training. So maybe you have a North region one day, you're shooting for the northern police departments and northern area fire department. To kind of, like Chief Lauder was saying, to get that facial recognition so you know who you're dealing with. I think that's kind of helped out over time too.
Guys, if I could jump in here, I'm down here in Springfield, Missouri, and our active shooter guidelines have just been in effect for probably about 2 years now. We did extensive rescue task force training with Springfield Police Department, Spring County, multiple EMS, and all types, dispatch, hospital officials. And our unified command post in the training
voice message system
went really, really well. But the actual event when we got there, PD, not to slam them, but they went back to their old school ways of just, like you say, it's an officer on the line that was inside trying to take care of the bad guy. We didn't have a lieutenant or a sergeant to go a face-to-face with. I'm a battalion chief, and our protocol is to find the officer in charge and get that unified command post as fast as possible. When we did the training, it went flawless. PD loved it. They loved ICS. They know that we're the ICS experts, and they asked for more training on it. And we did multiple drills with Missouri State University. Went really, really well. But I'm just concerned, and we only have two really between county and city law enforcement agencies. Occasionally we'll deal with Highway Patrol where they're going to be in charge over the other two. But our speed bump, we had an active shooter in underground storage here last fall. Fortunately, it was more of a domestic dispute and turned out not to be anything. But I don't think we ever even made radio contact with any of our law enforcement that were on scene until it was over. So that's our gap that we're facing. Like I say, in the actual drills, it goes very, very well because we've already got that command post set up. But I think part of our delay is getting a command officer from law enforcement, because they're not out in the streets like our battalion chiefs are here. Because our battalion chiefs are going to be there within, 7 or 8 minutes, where it might be a 20-minute response time for PD. That's where our speed bump is.
Brian, don't feel bad. That, like I said, we've been doing this for 6-8 years, and we're still having the same speed bump. It comes up at every training, and even more so when we've started these tabletops. And to be totally honest, probably the day this incident happens, it's going to be a speed bump that day too. But I think the more that we talk about it and the more that we reiterate to them how important it is, I feel like it might be a small speed bump, not a big one. But we even tell, when we're doing the trainings, the MACTAC trainings, which is the hand-on version, we might just tag a beat cop and say, hey, you're command. Because like you said, it may be the first 6, 8, 10 people there are just street cops, but we just need somebody to take charge for a moment and we say command, but really what we need is somebody standing next to us so we know what they're doing and they know what we're doing. And we tell them, yeah, that's great if it could be an officer, but it doesn't have to be. We just have to have somebody that's willing to stop and get this started. And that I think has helped a little bit, that they don't all just go, hey, we're not an officer, and move on. We let them know it can be anybody, just somebody that we need to get this ball rolling.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I'm going to take that back to our chief here, because I think if we, the police, they're going to have basically 2 priorities, and I'm obviously not a law enforcement guy, but I think they want to stop the bad guy for one, and then they need to be helping up and working on rescues. And so we got to get somebody there that can just communicate and let us know the way we set up our zones of where the bad guy is and where we can go in and start our task forces going in and set up the collection points. But I like that idea of getting them with the mentality of an officer there that can just be our eyes and ears on their radio channels and let us know what's going on. That's a good idea.
Brian, if you'd like, we'd be happy to share the PowerPoint for the tabletops with you. So
Cool.
Just let us know.
We can send you the SOG too as well. Just send us an email address.
Okay.
Yeah, Ryan, you could get at it
talking about
through
some of the stuff with speed bumps and the training and different things. But one thing I didn't even think about till we did the last tabletop training, and I was there, and sitting at our table were some of the police dispatchers. We talk about the fire, the EMS, and everybody else being involved, but we also have to make sure to include the dispatchers, whether it's the law enforcement dispatcher, the fire and EMS dispatcher. They have to understand the same terminology and the same things of what we're requesting, the radio frequency, whatever it could be, but don't disclude them on some of the training, because they can be an important part of the element of the entire operation. So make sure to include the dispatchers with that also, with your training.
Oh yeah, we've done that for sure. And we've done the active shooters. We've had, because our dispatch is a common 911 center, that it slows things down in the long run. But we've had the dispatchers, even hospital administrators, and with our active shooter drills and everything. But in a drill, it runs really, really smooth.
They always do when you have ample time to prepare. So that was a good point, Gary, keeping the dispatchers in the loop. And, I'm just sitting back here as a layman, as a line firefighter or company officer, the biggest takeaway I'm taking from you guys is we need to develop relationships with these street cops on our everyday runs. We don't get cops a lot in the city on medical runs, but we get them on accidents and stuff like that, and they come block the streets at fires. You take that time when you're picking up from a fire, or you're wrapping up an accident, to introduce yourself and talk to these cops, invite them by the engine house for a cup of coffee, and and then you could kind of get into some of this with your area cops. I mean, they're going to be the ones you run with anyway, and I think you can't really go at them. We've had times where they they kick in the doors and try and do a search real quick or something. And, once you explain to them, like, hey, obviously you're going to do that. That's why you signed up, but shut the door. Or, they park in the way. And everyone wants to get mad and holler at them. You can't just go off on them. Say, hey, we need the front of the building because our ladders are only so long. You can't really stretch a ladder any longer. And if you develop those relationships before these big type incidents with the local level cops, I think you're going to be better in the long run.
I'll tell you what, Jeff, I'll add on to that. And as I pick on Tommy Vatterott here real quick, that guy has done a heck of a job with us and a couple of our small municipalities on doing it. And it took a while for me to realize what he was doing, but we go into like some of the stop the bleed stuff and just carrying tourniquets and all that stuff that we've started working with our officers, and help, like a lot of that stuff is still kind of foreign. And luckily in our area, it's changed a lot. A lot of our guys are carrying it, but we'd run like a chest pain call, and I was getting some of our local officers coming up to me and like, hey man, I got my tourniquets right here on my belt. And at first it's like, okay, cool, good story. Like I'm move on. And then one of the next ones, I get another guy comes up to me later on that day. He's like, hey man, I got my tourniquets right here on my shoulder. I'm good to go. It's like, okay, good for you. And you start running more and more of these calls where these officers that we run with every day that we have a pretty good relationship, we're doing this. It's like, okay, like what's going on? Like, oh, Tommy comes up all the time and kind of mentions or asks about it and talks about it. And I guess in the law enforcement with the guys that we work for, that started spreading to where they've started mentioning that. So at least it's in their head now. And that's just one of our guys out of our department just making comments on calls of bringing it up and kind of just making comments to some of these guys. But I mean, it's spread. Unless, Tommy, you got more to add to that, unless they're just completely lying to me about it. But that was the story that they all told me every time they came up and told me they had tourniquets, was because you kept picking on them about it. So.
No, that's very true. Because when we first started kind of getting into this several years ago, none of them really carried them. And it's transitioned now to where it is that conversation. And honestly, like other people have said, it's teamwork, get to know the guys. And, years ago it was separated. And now, I don't care how many times we go on a call, how well you know the guy. After the call, I always say, thank you for being here. It's teamwork. It is a team. And then I look for their tourniquet, and they pretty much know it's coming. And there's a few, a few guys that you run into that, are getting their tourniquets, but we take care of that. But no, it's very important, because when you get there to, to this active shooter situation, like somebody had mentioned earlier, it's not the TAC medics, it's not the TAC guys that are running this that do the training all the time. Some of these people go through MAC-TAC once a year, and the fire department, is going to be a key role in probably telling what a lot of those guys to do, what to do in the very beginning as far as getting things set up, your strike teams, their entry teams, because, that first truck there, somebody's got to take care of staging. And if there's no other trucks there, which we're lucky because we got a lot of trucks, in close vicinity, but someone might have to, take care of that command position as well with one of those police officers till other people fit in. But once we start that in the staging, we're getting, we're getting the strike teams, the contact teams, we're getting the rescue task force teams, all that can be set up so fast and ready to go. And then when they call for it inside, man, it can be a fluid situation. But anyway.
Oh, that's awesome stuff. And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys may know more. Didn't a street cop save his life last week by having a tourniquet with him? Didn't he get shot?
Yeah. So
the
Webster Grove.
Webster.
That was I was talking to some of the guys, and that was a sabotage situation. He rolled up on that motorist, and he had his partner behind him, and he got out to approach the car, and it was a sabotage. So obviously there was gunfire. His partner was the one that got the bad guy, and so the first guy self-administered his tourniquet, and this partner dumped him in the car and took off. So man, this is a lot of the different things. There's a lot of them. That Dave and Matt and all these guys have, that when we teach, we show videos and we talk about, and on the streets when we're making friends and keeping those communications going, all these things are brought up. So now the Webster Grove thing that you're talking about, that's our new thing to talk about, my new thing to talk about. And I just can't tell these guys, hats off to those guys for, being able to having the tourniquet, being able to put the tourniquet on and use it. And then they shut down the highway and didn't wait for EMS to come. They dumped him in the police car and got him to where he needed to go. So hats off to those guys, man.
Yeah,
A
and
lot
on
of
that
people don't know that.
and on that note, that police officer was actually a city firefighter's brother.
Oh, okay.
So,
Hats
and
off to
Did-
those guys.
Two to the
I hadn't
guys.
heard that, Mario.
yeah, it's actually a city firefighter's brother. And,
I'm glad it had a good outcome, and that's the importance of tourniquets and stuff. And I want to jump into equipment next. That was going to be my next question. But
Well, Jeff, real
Eric
quick, I
is
got one
back on.
thing.
Right.
We've been talking, and most on here are very comfortable or familiar. We're fortunate enough to have fire-based EMS. That's another thing when you start talking about relationships and training. Some of the places that, we went around and talked to about this class, and Kyle can probably even go a little bit more in depth. Places that have private EMS or the EMS is totally separate from the fire service, they have problems working everyday calls together. So what's going to happen whenever you get to the magnitude of this incident? When you start talking about bringing down barriers, if you're an agency that works with a private EMS agency, or agency that have a very good relationship, that's one that you need to build. Also, the fire and police are important, but the fire and EMS is important because they're another portion that if we don't get them on the same page, that they can really throw us off into left field in a hurry and really affect the outcome of the operation.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Excellent point.
Yeah, that's true. And I know I've had conversations with several people and even some of our officers. And this kind of goes back into, this is outside of St. Louis County because we're pretty spoiled up our way with the way we operate. But you start getting into some of that, and unfortunately you kind of run into a lot of this stuff. It's just lack of communication with everybody, and kind of goes into the same where the fire department's like, this is what we're going to do. Well, they might not always think about the EMS and what they're going to do. And I've had a couple that EMS in their eyes of they're going to show up and go in and start saving lives right away and ditch their ambulance out in the front yard. To where on the fire side, we look at that, we're like, oh my gosh, like, well, who's going to transport the patients? And you start bringing up these questions, and that's the same thing. It's very interesting when you start trying to break some of this down. And granted, hats off to people for just trying to make progress and do something to realize that it is, but everybody's got to be on the same page and realize, hey, this is how it needs to progress and the best practices for this to happen. And bringing the ambulance in is interesting. And then also what I found with some of that stuff when talking to places that are just paramedics, because that kind of goes into a lot of them that I've been to, they also don't dive into the ICS system. They don't dive into all the stuff that we do on the fire side every day, because a lot of those places, they get their medical license and they start working for an ambulance district, and it is, okay, you're on transfers or you're on 911 calls, and that's pretty much all you do. And a lot of them don't have the thought process of the same as we do. So a lot of those, like I said, they're wanting to do something, and they take a class or something, and they realize they need to be going in and going to work. But you have a lot of that disconnect on that stuff too, with all the communication.
We had that issue out here last spring, Kyle. When we did active shooter out here with the county ambulance district. We had everybody at training and everybody was wanting to participate. And as the incident commander, I looked and I was kind of on one evolution, and then on the next evolution, I was just watching and witnessing what was going on. And we had all of the county ambulance medics were inside as rescue task forces. And we started patients are getting hauled out, and there was literally nobody to transport them to the hospital. And so, part of that when you're setting this up is that there's some very rules, delineations like this. You don't have to be a paramedic on the inside to affect good care. Most of these skills that we're teaching, these rescue task forces and stuff are skills that they that they train to basic foot soldiers in the military. And it's outside of like a first responder and an EMT type certification. These are things that are well within those types of people's wheelhouse. And we get caught up into it a lot. The cops are screaming, I want a paramedic. I need a paramedic. I'm like, no, this driver who has an EMT license for the last, so many years, he has the ability to do it. And it's again, it just goes back to training and, interoperability and communication with people.
Yep, and we've hit in our MacTac stuff. When we go in, and our TAC medics have actually started working with a lot of the B cops on trying to teach them the skills, because if they're in there and they have the guy down and you got 10 cops standing there, they can absolutely turn around and put a tourniquet on somebody that's bleeding to death. So we try to hit that home too, of like, hey, we're training the police officers to do this. You absolutely don't have to have a P number to go in and put a tourniquet on somebody. And it's a lot of this is basic stuff. But we have ran into that with the same thing, Jamie. Some of the other outlying districts from St. Louis County we've talked to, of they're wanting to do something, but they just don't grasp their complete role in this. Yep. So sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just kind of elaborating on that. The past couple of years, we've taught all of St. Louis County PD, basically essentially combat lifesaver, officer down skills, and a lot of other regional areas. And then we've taken that, they get their in-service, and then we bring that in and put some of those drills into our MacTac drills, just to touch on that, so they understand the importance of what they're doing. At the same time, there's been a lot of, in the past few years, there's been a lot of officers shot at, and other officers have saved their lives. I mean, the incident with the officer flaming on a ball that some people are aware of, another ball and officer put a whole roll of quick clot in his deck. That, along with good CPR early, is what saved his life. There's a lot of cases like that. We push those out there. And I know, Mario, you initially were kind of talking about how police are waiting for us to come and fix the problem. We're stressing the importance of them. When they find somebody that's bleeding out and they put that shooter down already, the contact teams have gone to get the shooter, and now they're bringing people CCP. Fix the problem. Use the skills and the skills we've given you.
But I think where we run into a problem, what we've encountered in the city anyway, is that concept of a CCP, because what has tended to happen is those officers go in and they bring those people basically from the inside to the outside to us. Mm-hmm. Instead of setting up a casualty collection point that's secure, that's closer, to bring our people in, to start taking care of those individuals. It just seems like the way I view it is, okay, so now you bring these people out, now you leave in an area that's secured, you're leaving it unsecured again. So that means
even if they do have enough officers to secure an area, if they're taking all that time, like you said, Mario, to bring them all the way outside, where they could be, if they've got 20 or 30 victims, they can take 3 or 4 officers, secure a room. The rest of the officers can bring those victims to the room, and you can start care there.
Correct.
The quicker we're teaching them to actually start care out there before they get to the CCP, throw a tourniquet on or whatever they have to, bring them to the CCP. We'll triage them and get them out.
Right.
It's as they say, time is life. And these guys, especially on bleeding wounds, they may not survive that extra couple minutes of them dragging them outside. You've got fresh rescue task forces that can go in and get them. You're definitely right. And I hope, and I wonder if, as things progress and as they get more confidence, I know in the past there was discussion of maybe some of them coming out and some of our TAC team leadership talked to some of the city officers, and there was discussion of them coming and watching and joining us during MacTac to see how we were doing it. Unfortunately, that never happened, but maybe that would, maybe that would build their confidence, or maybe that would show them that they're seeing how this is done, and maybe that would move that forward. I don't know.
And I agree. Like I said, I think for us, it's the biggest issue we have, honestly, is upper brass.
Sure.
That's where we run into our roadblocks. The biggest, I think, for whatever reason, because we've talked to upper brass. Hey, we need to get together, talk about this, and it's one of those things. Oh, that sounds great, but it never happens.
Yeah.
Mario,
we did have
Mario, to the carpenter that only has a hammer, every problem's a nail. And they really don't understand, the tools that are at their disposal. And sometimes they don't want to know, that's a big problem,
Oh,
we
I agree.
did have some of your command staff from city police out in the tabletops, just so you know, this last January.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's good. Because, and I had a talk with one of our deputy chiefs not too long ago regarding this, and it was kind of the same in his eyes. It was kind of the same feeling that he got talking with the police department upper brass. It's kind of like, hey, this is ours, not yours type, that ego thing. And it was a shame to hear that, but we'll work through it. We'll push through it and we'll get through it, and hopefully we can get something in place to get everybody on board where we're all on the same page and they understand our capabilities, and in turn our firefighters know what the role of that police officer is. So it kind of goes both ways.
It'll happen.
I firmly believe that our success has been a big part of our success over the past 8 years has been the relationship. It was designed by the tactical team, and a lot of those guys have gone on to get promoted throughout the department. And you have a chief who that's where he came from, upper command staff's all from there. And I think that's a big reason why at least St. Louis County Police has adopted this and it's had so much success. And I think that's a big part of it. They understand what we can bring to the table and what we've learned. I mean, we did things differently 8 years ago, changed a little bit more, went back to some other things, brought some new things in. And I think that's just a huge advantage we have for how well this has succeeded.
I agree 100%, Dave. It's the same thing in St. Charles City. Absolutely 100%.
Well, we'll catch up with you downtown then. Sometimes things work a little slower in city politics and all that. So, hey Erica, were you able to get your mic on? I don't want you to think we forgot about you. Your communication, your point on communication you had.
I'm guessing not.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe she could type it in the chat if she can get the chat from the app.
Here, let me change the subject a little bit if I can. For you guys, how much money is your department throwing into this?
Damon?
In the way of training or in the way of
Equipment for your personnel?
So we've purchased ballistic vests for all of our personnel about 2014, 2015.
Is that for every riding
those
position or for every individual issued them personally?
every individual.
Okay.
We're about to
Those have a 5-year shelf life, so those will be replaced this year, I believe. So that's probably the largest expense in the way of equipment, aside from probably what the guys from the TAC team receive. I think those are all supplied, but our biggest expense is manpower for overtime, for the warrants, and for the training that we actually supply people for the tabletop trainings. They're off duty, so
that's gotten better.
A commitment on our side.
First, it was if we had the manpower, somebody went on duty. If not, somebody's got to volunteer to go off duty. 2 years ago, we picked up some steam, some things changed, and now we have an agreement that we provide instructors for half the month of MACTAC, and Monarch does the other half. And that has made a huge difference because just for continuity of instructors, so you're getting the same material every time.
Right.
So if you're looking for a dollar figure, I don't have that in front of me.
No, I was just wondering.
Categories, if you will.
Because we are a little bit slow on the equipment side of getting equipment out to our personnel, to keep them safe, which it's a work in progress. We always want things to move a little bit faster than they can, and and like Jeff said, when you're dealing with city politics, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, Mario, we kind of what they were talking with equipment wise. The district purchased everybody vests, but then they've also purchased a lot of the specialized bags that we carry on our fire trucks and our ambulances and stuff. And I think Marin's still on here. That's kind of in his wheelhouse. If not, I think Cruz might be able to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit, like what you guys looked into and purchasing, because I know a lot of our stuff wasn't. I know these guys, and they can hit on it. Didn't go to like Galls and just like, oh, here's the active shooter bag. This is what we're buying. A lot of it was individually purchased, and a lot of thought went into it.
We built our own. Jay, you on here?
I am. I'm a little mobile, but yeah, we're here.
Okay, he's the guy. Ask him.
Well, I can't take all that credit, but yeah, the idea was we were trying to minimize how much more we had to buy because we wanted to utilize the things that we kind of already had, and then beyond the things we had, what more could we do that's in a small capacity, because we wanted to make sure more people had the equipment, not just having one big central bag that people had to go to, but we wanted to be able to disperse that equipment to as many people as possible, with our main concern is bleeding control. So, monitors and that kind of thing weren't any kind of consideration, but tourniquets being the big one, like simple things like trauma shears tape, you can make your own wound kits. We did do the Celox gauze, so that type of quick clotting agent, that was probably one of the bigger expenses to, making these kits. And then we just kind of utilized one bag to hold about 6 other bags. So when we got on scene, we would have somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 to 36 individual kits that we could distribute to the rescue strike teams before they went in. And remember, the strike team would have everything they needed to treat a patient. Then we looked into getting some additional things like patient movers, some roll-up stretchers and things like that.
And then this year we also added the Stop the Bleed kits at all of our schools. So all of our primary and secondary schools have Stop the Bleed kits throughout the schools.
That's great.
So
We
Jason,
went. Go ahead.
What Jason said about the 26 individual kits, Mario, you're probably looking about $75 a kit for the items inside those times 26. So that's what the supplies have cost us, but it just came straight out of EMS supplies.
Okay.
And you said that's just quick clot gauze and tourniquets, trauma dressings, I assume.
Chest needles, decompression needles. I think there's a roll of tape in there, and then you got to pay for the bag too.
Yeah, we went ahead and we contracted with North American Rescue Products, and they've got a product called a Rapid Response Kit, and we modified it for our department. It comes kind of pre-canned. It has some things, but you have the ability to, we took some things off and added some things, and we keep 2 of those Rapid Response Kits on every engine and 1 on every ambulance, with the thought process that if you've got a 4-man engine company, they can split 2 and 2 into, a 4-man engine company can split into 2 rescue task forces, and one of our fire apparatus ambulances could be another, rescue task force. And I think each kit we've got set up can handle about 4 patients or so, somewhere in there.
Can you guys get some of the pictures of these kits when you get back to work, and we'll get them posted on the page?
I'm looking through my stuff, Jeff, to see if I can share it while we're talking about it.
You can.
Well,
right,
hey, Jeff, just so you know, we do have some of those kits, but again, they're not out on the street. So I think if you got a hold of like Christian, he could probably show you what one of the kits looks like.
Yeah, I wanted some pictures for people that come back and listen to this later, that
Gotcha.
we can get it up on our page. I know it's a work in progress, on our job, and I'm sure they're coming, with a lot of other things, but we did kind of briefly mention it, but I kind of want to go back. Is every department providing what kind of body armor are you providing for your people? Because obviously you should be custom fit for it, because different body types. But those of you that aren't, are you putting several sizes on each truck? Are you providing ballistic helmets and stuff like that? Or is it just like a lot of times we get, I guess, old police vest or vest, the extra order from the police. So just curious what other departments are doing. Do what?
I can relate to your custom size fitting, okay?
The Coleman Tent and Awning Store provides that ballistic.
Whoa, little buddy.
Hey,
So
that's harsh. I got my own vest, so I'm good. But I'm just saying in general, for people out there, departments looking to maybe get some for riding positions or get their people fit. I mean, I know it's a high dollar item, but I'm sure people have the same questions I do.
I'm in a process of working on that right now, and we're actually really fortunate because in the St. Louis metro area, you have Proper, who makes a great product, and you have First Spear located. Proper's in Weldon Spring, and First Spear's in Fenton, and we're in the process of getting something new. So 2014, right when Ferguson kicked off, they went out and purchased a bunch of standard level police body armor, the type that they would wear under their uniform. We have an outside carrier for it. Over the past couple of years, we've hired some more people, and they started getting the same level of protection plus a plate carrier. So we're evaluating that right now. I've got one at Station 4 for a couple different guys to try out. We're trying to switch between the two, see which one we want to go with. But that gets costly. I mean, you're looking, depending on what level plate you use, and if you get a front and a back plate, I mean, you can get up in the $2,000 range.
Gotcha.
But if you're interested in going to a place, I can give you numbers, the contact for those guys, and we can put on the website as well, just who to call at those places, and they'll come out and talk to you. One will come out and talk to you, the other one you got to go see. But they've been great, and they individual size people, and it works out pretty well.
Yeah,
You guys see that picture of the
you have to share it. You have to hit the share button and then share it to the group. It's set up that you guys can share. So whoever's asking that, Brian from Springfield there said they have 3 sizes of vest, helmet, vest, or same color as turnout gear, with fire across it, as big as possible. So that's cool. That was just my own personal questions. I'm sure people have that. I do have I have a First Spear plate carrier, but my buddy sells for them, so I'm kind of spoiled there. But all right, anybody got anything else for PPE? Are you guys doing helmets for your entry teams, your task forces?
We don't.
No.
We have a handful, and then the TAC guys have their own, but we don't carry that stuff on the engines. There's no room for all of it for the TAC team guys.
Yeah, just curious. Anyone else?
Most of that stuff is Kevlar, Jeff, and those helmets, and knowing how firemen are when they're swapping out trucks and changing trucks, they're just going to grab a bag and toss it onto the engine bay floor. And Kevlar doesn't like getting banged off the floor too many times, and that therein lies the misconception as far as helmets and everything else. Like, again, we're not SWAT operators. We're literally some firemen with some skills that need to get in there. And I don't know, the helmets just add a good cost to it, and are just the cost benefit just is not there. The road cops aren't wearing helmets in there when they're running into that thing. So
no, I just people had mentioned it, and I don't know a lot about it. Got another guy talking about Kirksville using RMA armor out of Southwest Iowa. So people that are listening, that's another option that's out there. So, we've covered a lot, broad array of stuff. And, one thing that we haven't talked about that past lessons learned. I know there's a pretty good podcast out there that John's, I'm probably butchering it, Sparrow out of Colorado. He was on the Aurora shooting. I think it's Fit to Fight Fire. Talks about the lessons learned they had there. Obviously, it's not like fires. I mean, these events are once in a career, hopefully never in a career type events. So what are some things you guys are doing to take these past lessons learned? Because, like I said, fires, everybody goes to fires, some more frequent than others, but you're going to have a chance to practice that in your career. This is one of those things that we don't. So how are we taking lessons learned, or what are some of the biggest takeaways, and how we bringing that back to our departments and our training organizations?
I think one thing that's changed, and it kind of Chief Tiemann reflected on the priorities that we run with. For years and years, we had the concept was that we wait for police to make it safe, and we'd sit around and they joke and they beat us down for it, and we wait for the scene to be safe. And the first couple of years of MACTAC, you had guys, we'd go to training and you'd hear grumblings around the firehouse, guys saying, "I'm not going in there. There's no way I'm going in there." And it took a couple of years and some drill together and getting those guys to feel comfortable. I mean, I think we made a big change in that in the past even 4 or 5 years, and getting people to have more buy-in that, hey, we're moving up faster. We have to get in there to get people out based on, you go back to Columbine, and they waited for the SWAT team. That was a massive, massive mistake, but nobody knew any better, and they weren't doing it that way. You look at the Pulse shooting in Orlando. The firehouse was a block away, and people from the club ran to the firehouse, banging on to get in the door. They didn't let them in because I don't know if you got suspects involved. They didn't have the resource to manage the firehouse without having any security, any control whatsoever. You go to Parkland, lessons learned there. I mean, one of the big things there is their CCP was on a street corner a couple hundred yards from the building because there were so many vehicles blocking down every road around there. And the past couple of years, we've tried to stress the importance of parking out of the way. We joke about cops parking in front of the house on fire. This is going to be way worse if we don't educate our people about this. The past couple of years, we kind of joke about if you ever go on a call or you see county TAC go somewhere, they park in a pretty little line, and I park my truck right in the middle to mess it up. But they do this every time. And if you go in and you're a police officer and you say, hey, park on the grass, somebody else is going to think, oh, maybe I should do that too, just to get them thinking about those things and learn the lessons. So those are just a couple of things I've noticed over the past couple of years and what we've learned. But
a few additional things we came up with from the tabletops for the supervisors was being inclusive of the PIOs early, getting them deployed quickly so you can kind of control the media and the parents in these situations as best you can. They're going to clog up your ingress and egress routes very quickly. And that's an issue that because you're going to be in the middle of the battle, you don't have time to think about. So you need to get that farmed out to somebody quickly. So getting PIOs deployed, getting that process in place as soon as you start confirming that it's an active killer incident, that's going to really make a huge difference. So that was one of them, or a couple of them. The last was the implementation of the Stop the Bleed program this year. We realized that we may not even, with our best efforts, we may not be in there in the first few minutes. So if we can teach these teachers or any other staff inside of a school to be able to apply a tourniquet to a kid, they could save their life before we can get in there. So we kind of looked at it from could this potentially be a waste of money? Yeah. But the reality is if we can get some of these Stop the Bleed kits throughout the schools and teach the faculty how to use them and why to use them, it could make a difference. And it could make a difference in just a normal accident within the school as well. So we've actually had them used one time within one of our schools, not related to an active shooter. So already since we put them in place. So they're like $12 a piece, and it makes a big difference. So those are a few of the things that we came up with this year so far.
And it only makes sense how much money a year do we give away and fire extinguisher training and all that stuff. So
Plastic helmets.
Yeah, I mean it's great. I mean, and Dave's point about how they've come from Columbine to where we're at today. It's unfortunate that we had all these events to get to that point, but it's cool to see where it's gone because most of the time these people, they're cowards, and as soon as someone puts up a fight, they're gonna quit or kill themselves anyway. So kind of lessons learned, valuable stuff.
I think the major takeaway here is something that Dave said and something that Tom has touched on as well. And that is that we have to have a relationship with our police departments. It's absolutely imperative, because if there is no relationship there, they will not look to us when things are really bad with this. Or if they do look to us, it's going to be very disjointed. And so, we cannot afford for our citizens to suffer because we have a poor relationship with the other entities outside of there. And I think that Dave and Tom touched on it the best, about probably the best thing that we've talked about throughout this whole podcast today, was that we have to have relationships, with those law enforcement entities, because ultimately this is their deal, and they'll be more than happy to tell you that. That's funny seeing everybody jump at their stuff, thinking it's them.
Don't know what that was, but wow. Glad I didn't have my earbuds in.
No, I think it was me. My stuff started going haywire. I had to start throwing all these headphones out. So that's my bad. Perfect. Are you guys hearing me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. My wife's the IT professional. Clearly, I am not. So we've been going for a while now. It's everyone's had great stuff. I've learned a lot. Kind of being not having a lot of training on this. The big thing I want to throw it to Gary. That's stuck out in my mind. If we respond to these type of incidents, taking care of our people, particularly in the mental health aspect, it's kind of a hot topic in the fire service. It's clearly a real thing, and it's affecting firefighters left and right, and police officers as well. So, Gary, I think you had a few things you wanted to throw in about taking care of our people, and then we'll open it up to anyone else that, training or classes, stuff that's benefiting their departments.
Yeah, there was last year I had attended a class that was a recap. It was actually from a deputy chief of operations of Clark County, Nevada, and spoke about the Las Vegas shooting. And he talked about all the things we talked about today: the good relationship with law enforcement, the unified command, working together, being familiar with the things that are going on, and working with the hospital. He talked about all of that. But one of the things he included in the closing was, don't forget about the most important patients at the end of the incident. That's our people. What our people have just went through, the traumatic event, getting debriefing in for our people, getting debriefing in for our people's families, so that they can kind of understand and start seeing, early signs of somebody having problems from dealing with an incident of that magnitude, or something that you don't deal with every day. Another thing that he talked about, and I know different classes that I've taken that you guys have done that we haven't really talked about today, but remember these areas that we're responding into. These could be some of our responders' children that are in these schools, that are in their families, that could be in these facilities that we're going to. The Las Vegas shooting, one of the first, I can't remember, it was the first or the second engine that was arriving there. He knew his daughter was there at the concert. So again, what's the mindset that's putting him in, responding that he's going to an incident that he knows where his child is there and he can't find her. Actually, of that incident, his daughter actually ended up as one of the victims. She was a survivor. But again, putting one of the responders in that takes a huge mental strain, not just on him, but then also his entire company, because everybody else is worrying about, what their coworkers going through, how they can help them. But then they're faced with this incident that they have to hit head on and take care of with that. So, keep that in mind. And one of the other things, to go back, what Mike was talking about earlier with the PIOs, one of the very important things of keeping the media away from our emergency responders, get your PIOs involved in that early and just tell them, do not contact our firehouses, do not contact the police stations, do not contact, any of these people. Stay away from them, give them their time to be able to do what they need to do on their own, and just shield them from all of that and try to do what you can to get everybody through that. It's not, I'm sure everybody on here at one time or another has done some type of a critical incident debriefing. Well, something like this it's the low frequency event. It's a once in a career event, and we don't know how to deal with that as far as what stressors we need to cope with that and move forward. So really step back, and that's something that within your agency you should address now and come up with that plan that as soon as, don't wait until the event's over. As soon as the event happens, have it to where you can start putting something into place to start getting help for our people, isolating our people, counseling that's needed, and just making sure that our people come through it okay. But then again, going back to the original scenario, what happens if one of our responders' family members involved? How are we going to assist them? So it creates another entire problem there that we have to make sure that we deal with at the same time we're handling the emergency. So just, again, kind of something to think about to keep in your toolbox as you're planning these through your organization. Unfortunately, you're not going to know how your agency is going to do until you have to deal with it.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously it's we're losing more people to mental health type problems than we are, on the fire ground. So it's something to take into consideration. Does anybody got anything they want to add on that?
Yeah, I'll kind of talk. I know early on and within the fire district I work at, I know we've had those discussions of like, hey, how are we going to go about handling this? Because where I work at, we have a lot of our guys that live in district and kids go to our schools of, looking at that company officer. And when this goes down, if you've got one of these guys riding backstep for you, what are you going to do with them? So that discussion's been had with us a lot of times. I bring that up a lot of the places when we go to and talk with the MACTAC and the tabletops, and you're talking to these chief officers of putting that thought process in their head. And it usually you get that deer in the headlights look with a lot of them, like, oh shit, I've never thought about that. I've got 5 people who kids go to these schools. What am I going to do with those people? Because the father part kicks in where you're going to be going 100 miles an hour. If I got to get in there and save my kid, and there's not going to be anybody that's going to tell me no. There's a lot of stuff you're going to have to think about with that whenever if this ever happens and you're put in that situation, especially as a company officer and you got that guy riding backstep for you.
Yeah, that's definitely some probably none of us want to think about, but you got to do it. Got to make those hard decisions, think about it in advance.
Yeah, the mental health aspect for this, it goes a long way. I always start my class when I go and teach some of the stuff for Engine House. Of the whole reason I'm big into this is because of my father-in-law was involved in a shooting in North St. Louis 9-10 years ago now. It was a while back at the ABB plant. And I lived that day on my end with the family, and on his side of it was pretty interesting. And then when he starts opening up and telling me the stories about it and everything he lived through that day, and going to the funerals with him for his coworkers, and my wife's godfather, who was one of the guys, Terry Mabry, that got murdered up there that day, and just going through and listening and seeing how he lived through it and everything he still has today with the PTSD and all that stuff. It's pretty interesting. We're all trained, and all of us, we always joke we have a warped sense of humor, and we look at stuff completely different. But it's interesting when you sit back and look at somebody who does not work at all in our field and has never ever thought about anything like that until that day happened, and then just going through sitting with the family that day on not knowing what's going on. And then I was the one that picked him and 2 other coworkers up from the police precinct up in North St. Louis, and I'll tell you, that was the quietest hour-and-a-half car ride I've ever had coming back. Not a word was mentioned, and it took him probably 2 months before he started opening up about it, and that was to just a couple key individuals. But what he lived through that day was life-changing for him. And it's interesting to sit back and you see how different of a person he is now just from going through that. So, I mean, it's definitely eye-opening for us if you look at it that way, of when we're in there working with all these people, of what they're going through too, and then the whole mental health aspect of it.
Excellent point. And it's like everything else, our saving grace is, we get to go back to the firehouse with our brothers and, work it out and make our little fun jokes or, all that stuff and do what we do. But, if they have all that taken away like he did, that could really mess with you in the long term. So I'd like to open it up now. We have several people on. Anybody got any questions? I think we've hit a lot of the stuff in the chat. If I missed something or skipped over your comment, please feel free to unmute yourself or send it again. We'll get your questions answered before we wrap this up. Need to play like the Jeopardy soundtrack while we're waiting. All right. Well, has anybody got anything they'd like to say to wrap up? It's been awesome from not having a lot of experience or in very minimal training in this stuff to sit here and listen to all you guys provide excellent stuff and excellent information. And obviously, if anybody has any further questions, you can get at us through our social media pages and we'll put you in contact with the right thing, or our website, or our enginehousetraining@gmail.com. We will steer you in the right direction. If you need to get a hold of any of the people who contributed, between Kyle and all the guys on here, we will definitely put you in contact. So if we have no other questions, anybody got anything they want to say to wrap up?
Hey, Jeff, I did get some of these pictures, if I can figure out how to share them on here.
Yeah, I'll tell you how to do that. There's a screen share at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and click that.
All right, hold on.
While he's doing that, I just want to say in closing, form those relationships. If you haven't met your school district officials, the police that are going to be responding with you, reach out, at least form those relationships before you have to on the scene. And to follow up on what Chief Tiemann said, information is power. As this event progresses, think about what information you need to address right away and what information you can wait to address at a briefing or a conference. If it's something that interferes directly with your operations, it may need to be addressed. If it's something as simple as correcting the number of people involved, that's something that can wait until your briefing or your conference. Work with your PIO, work with your school public relations and media folks so that you can start getting that information out as quickly as possible. School district officials probably have a plan in place directing parents where to go so that they're not interfering with your operations. So try to get that information out as quickly as possible.
And just to dovetail to that real quick before you go into the next, if your agency doesn't have a PIO and you know that another agency nearby does, create that relationship ahead of time as well and make sure that you can get them deployed as fast as you can. That's going to make a big difference, because time really, them getting in touch with the newsrooms and getting in touch with folks ahead of time is going to make a huge difference for your operational folks.
Awesome. All good stuff. Kyle, I see you got some pictures up. You want to explain?
Is it finally working?
Yep.
So just because we were talking about it, this is what we carry at Metro West, and we actually just added another new bag that I don't have a picture of yet. This is the one we keep on all of our fire trucks. If everybody can see it, we have the equipment inside of this, and this is kind of what Jason Marin was talking about. We have the one big bag, and then inside of this bag is several individual kits that we carry this stuff here. And each one of these kits has a carabiner and a hand loop on it that you can take them out of this big bag once you get in there, and you can pass it off and get what you need out of there. The bigger bags, smaller, it's more streamlined, that can be carried. Jason, if you're still on here and have anything you want to add about this. But this is the one that we started carrying on all of our fire trucks. It started on our ambulances, and then we moved it over because the rescue task force is coming off our fire trucks, mainly the way we operate. And then this here's some different vests that I've seen and had other people send me pictures of. that you can open up, and most of the stuff's carried on your vest, and then a lot of your equipment's right there as it opens up. Just a different way of carrying it. Chief Lauder, this might look familiar to you, but this is what Florissant's carrying and some of their stuff with their triage. The thing I kind of like about theirs a lot is they have the triage tape on the outside versus a lot of the stuff we've talked about with the old school, the fast triage and all that, and trying to fill out the tags. This is probably one of the easiest, simplest ways that we've talked about and training wise of just using the electrical tape or some kind of tape or something you can tear off and wrap around somebody's arm real quick and be done with it, and just the different colors and just moving from there. So this is just a couple of things. I'm sure, Jeff, we can post some of this stuff on our Facebook page, our website, if anybody else has questions. And then as always, people can always reach out to us and if more questions and discuss in more detail or get specs and stuff like that out to anybody.
Yeah, that tape is surveyor's tape. It doesn't goop up in the heat, and it's non-stick. So what we found is when we try to use that colored electrical tape, sitting in a St. Louis heat of July, it got all goopy and turned into one big mass. So the surveyor's tape works much, much better.
Oh, that's like the tape they hang on posts then, Chief, right? Like when they ground stakes and all that?
Yes, sir. That's exactly right.
That's a great idea. Awesome. It's good stuff. Well, hey guys, if no one else has anything, I want to thank you for taking a couple hours of your time and sharing your information with, we get a lot of hits on this, so this is going to affect a lot of people, and I want to thank you on behalf of Engine House Training, and learned a lot. I think all the people did, and I want to thank you guys for your time. And we'll post in the next couple of days. We'll be back next week with some RIT company operations is going to be the subject for next week. So we will see you there. And thanks again for listening to all the listeners out there, and thanks for taking the time to join us live and be here with us. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Stop that recording.